The RMS Empress of Ireland cut through the St. Lawrence River like a ghost in the fog. It was late on the night of May 28th, 1914, and the liner had only departed from Quebec City a few hours earlier. The passengers, over 1,400 of them, were settling in for the night. Some enjoyed the luxury of first-class cabins, sipping brandy and murmuring about their expectations in England. Others, huddled in third-class quarters, dreamed of what awaited them across the Atlantic. Better lives, new beginnings. On the bridge, Captain Henry Kendall stood at the helm, his sharp eyes peering into the thick fog rolling in from the riverbanks. It was denser than usual, a smothering gray wall that swallowed everything ahead. The waters were eerily calm, but Kendall knew that the river was always treacherous, especially at night. He ordered the Empress to proceed at a cautious speed. Somewhere in the mist, another ship was approaching, the Storstad, a Norwegian collier laden with coal. The sound of a low whistle echoed across the water. Kendall responded with one of his own, a deep, guttural call into the unknown. The reply came almost immediately, but the fog distorted everything, making it impossible to tell precisely where the other vessel was. The captain's hands tightened on the brass railing. He had navigated these waters countless times, but something about this night felt different, like a storm brewing beneath the placid surface. Then, suddenly, through the mist, a shadow emerged. The collision, a terrible metallic groan, tore through the night as the Storstad loomed into view, its black hull glistening with moisture. It was too close, too fast. "Hard to port," Kendall shouted, but it was too late. The Storstad's reinforced bow plowed into the Empress's starboard side, just forward of the midsection. The impact sent a bone-jarring shudder through the entire ship, as though a giant had struck it with an iron fist. Passengers were thrown from their beds. The grand chandelier in the first-class lounge quivered violently before crashing to the floor in a shower of glass. A moment of silence, then a sound like the roar of 1,000 rivers. Water poured in through the gaping wound in the heel, rushing into the lower compartments with terrifying force. Within minutes, the ship began to list sharply to starboard. Screams erupted throughout the decks. People scrambled into the corridors, clutching whatever they could find. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers barked orders. Crew members struggled to maintain order, their voices barely audible above the chaos. In the engine room, boilers hissed and groaned, steam hissing like an angry beast as seawater surged in. The crewmen barely had time to react before the frigid water swallowed the space whole. Kendall fought to stay upright as the bridge tilted beneath him. He grasped the brass telegraph, sending out a desperate distress signal. He knew that help was too far away. There was no time for rescue. The Empress of Ireland was dying, and she was dying fast. The struggle for survival. Above deck, panic reigned. Passengers stumbled toward the lifeboats, but the ship's rapid tilt made launching them nearly impossible. On one side, the lifeboats dangled uselessly above the water, unable to be lowered properly. On the other, boats crashed into the water before anyone could climb in, the angles of the decks growing steeper by the second. A young couple, James and Eleanor Whitmore, clung to each other near the railing. "We have to jump," Eleanor cried, her fingers digging into her husband's arms. James hesitated. The water was black and churning, already swallowing people who had leaped too soon. "Stay with me," he whispered, but Eleanor was already climbing onto the railing. Now, they jumped. The impact stole the breath from their lungs. The shock of the icy water like knives against their skin. Around them, hundreds struggled to stay afloat, their cries piercing the night. Near the stern, Reverend Robert Davis gathered a group of terrified passengers. "Hold hands, hold fast," he urged, his voice unwavering. He led them in a prayer, their voices quivering but strong, even as the deck beneath them began to vanish beneath the waves. On the bridge, Captain Kendall refused to leave his post. He knew there was no escaping. He watched as his ship, his pride, was consumed by the river, its lights flickering one last time before the cold darkness swallowed them whole, the silence after the storm. In just 14 minutes, the RMS Empress of Ireland was gone. The river, moments ago a violent battlefield of splintered wood and desperate cries, fell eerily still. The Storstad, damaged but afloat, cast its searchlights across the water, illuminating hundreds of heads bobbing among the wreckage. Survivors clung to wooden beams, overturned lifeboats, and each other, their lips turning blue from the merciless cold. James and Eleanor, still gripping each other, found a floating door and climbed onto it, gasping for breath. We made it," Eleanor sobbed, pressing her forehead against James's. But around them, so many had not. Rescue boats arrived too late for most. Of the 1,277 souls aboard, only 465 survived. By dawn, the river was quiet again. The last traces of the Empress of Ireland lay beneath the waves, along with the 1,012 lives lost. A tragedy now etched into the depths of history. The aftermath. Survivors were pulled aboard rescue boats, shivering and barely conscious. Many wept, others sat in silence, the weight of the catastrophe pressing down on them. Eleanor trembled as a blanket was draped around her shoulders, her eyes locked on the horizon where the ship had disappeared. "What now?" she whispered. James swallowed hard, his throat raw from the icy water. "We live, Eleanor. We live for them." In the days that followed, the world would learn of the disaster, the scale of its horror, sending ripples across nations. Inquiries would be held, blame assigned. But nothing could change the cold truth. The Empress of Ireland had joined the depths, a forgotten tragedy overshadowed by time. But for those who survived, the memory would never fade. It would live in their haunted dreams, and in the whispers of the river, forever mourning the souls it had claimed. A lingering legacy. Years passed, but the survivors could never fully escape the shadow of that night. Some found solace in telling their stories. Others remained silent, burdened by survivors' guilt. James and Eleanor, bound forever by that moment, dedicated their lives to ensuring the memory of the lost was not forgotten. On the anniversary of the tragedy, they stood at the river's edge, listening to the whispers of the water, and they remembered